Joining me here in this segment is legal expert Austin Pennington, as it was announced just a couple of days ago that federal prosecutors are launching a criminal probe of opioid makers and distributors. And so this man here, Austin, has been following this case since the very beginning. They're providing us with great insight on it. So I definitely wanted to get him on with us today to give us the latest. Austin, thank you so much for your time on this Black Friday.
Hey, Brandon, always happy to be here.
Absolutely. So, all right, give us the latest. Give us your impression of what's going on, the big news this week about the federal prosecutors launching the criminal probe.
Well, Brandon, as you said, I've been following this situation for quite some time, and you'll probably recall when we spoke earlier this year, I predicted that we would eventually see the DEA and the DOJ get involved with this probe. It was really just a matter of time, and now here we are. And what's going on here is we've got 6 drug companies that have been subpoenaed in some way, shape, or form, primarily coming out of the Brooklyn U.S. Attorney's Office, to provide information and insight on their manufacturing and distribution of these opioid drugs. And one interesting thing to look at here, it sounds a little alarming to some, but it makes sense to me, is that some of these subpoenas came out as early as April. A lot of them came out this summer, but we're just now hearing about this, and that's predominantly because the DEA doesn't freely disseminate this information, as you probably imagine. Mm-hmm. And these drug companies, they didn't want to let this stuff out because obviously that would have hurt them in a lot of these civil lawsuits that are going on.
Right. So the burden of proof is much greater in criminal cases than it is civil, you knowing that, being a lawyer. What will federal investigators need to find in order to prove criminal intent?
Well, they're going to have to show that these drug companies willfully and intentionally avoided the FDA requirements for how to distribute these drugs. And so that's a high hurdle. And honestly, I don't think they're going to be able to get there. But what I think is going to happen is more on what we call the civil and administrative penalty side, where the FDA is going to sanction these companies for not reporting certain signs that they saw of suspicious orders of these drugs. Mm-hmm. These certain signs that are put in place that these drug companies are required to report are designed to highlight and indicate where drugs are potentially being used for non-medical purposes. And on the civil side, as you just pointed out, Brandon, the burden is much lower. So I think the prosecutors are going to have a hard time showing that these companies intentionally sidestep these requirements in order to profit from them.
And of course, I think you were referencing the Controlled Substances Act, which companies are required to monitor commonly abused drugs, including by reporting suspicious orders like you were talking about, maintaining compliance programs, and disclosing suspicious pharmacy customers to the government, correct?
Exactly, and that's part of the Comprehensive Drug Abuse and Prevention Act that came in under the Nixon administration in 1970. And this is the act where they scheduled out. You know, we've heard Schedule I drugs, we've heard about Schedule II drugs. It was an effort by the U.S. government to try and attack this drug abuse problem. And so what we're dealing with primarily are these Schedule II drugs that have a tendency to have a high abuse rate. And that's what we're dealing with here. And all those regulations that we were just talking about are promulgated under that act.
So at least 400,000 people have died in the U.S. from overdoses of legal and illegal opioids since 1999. That's according to federal data. You know, as we've been talking about, cities, counties, states, federal prosecutors trying to hold these drug makers and distributors and pharmacies accountable through these lawsuits and prosecutions. Where do we go from here? I mean, you know, we're talking about the burden of proof that's needed in this situation. You know, where do we go from here? Are you seeing things playing out not only as you may have expected, like you talked about earlier in your predictions, but in the manner that they should be playing out?
It's yes and no, Brandon. So yes, I think they're playing out in a way I would have predicted and that they should play out, where now we're getting the FDA involved and we're getting the DOJ involved. But the other side of this, which I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but it's the banner I keep waving over and over again as we go through this opioid crisis, is that we need to see some regulations on the front end of how these drugs are marketed, how they are explained to our physicians, how those appointments go, so that the people who are in the position to prescribe them, the doctors, have the right information to prevent this from ever happening again.
So Austin Pennington has been joining us, and, you know, for people that may have not gotten a chance to hear his explanation as to why this has really impacted them and made, hey, how's it going? So for people that have, and I apologize, I was saying hi to somebody in the studio. Somebody, as a matter of fact, I got to mention this. Moon is out today, but his wife and daughter bring in some goodies for us here. So I want to say thank you to them. But as we were talking about, Austin, you covering this case, for those that don't remember our conversation about it, as a lawyer, there's so many different areas in the legal system that you can go to follow and to cover. What is it about the opioid case that has really caught your attention?
It really is the fact that on the front end of this deal, and I don't want to be repetitive, but the front end is that you see so many actions taken by these pharmaceutical companies and how they were training their sales reps and how they were knowingly trying to exploit and target doctors who had a reputation for prescribing more and more of these pills. And there were incentives put in place to go after and pitch these pills to these doctors. It's just a very blatant and wanton use of their power to get these drugs pushed out there for the purpose of profit. And the long-reaching ramifications of it, we haven't fully even seen yet. And I'll go as deep to say that we've had 400,000 deaths. We've had a huge influx in our federal and state criminal system where we've got so many people hooked on these drugs. And it's really been started from the pill pushing done by these pharmaceutical companies. And so I think that's where my passion has been wrapped up here, is that it's a problem that started with greed that ballooned into a problem that nobody could have ever predicted would have gotten this big.
Austin Pennington has been our guest this morning. Austin, thank you so much. If there's anything we haven't covered, though, if there's anything we haven't covered, please tell us before I let you go. But thank you so much, though, for letting us, giving us the latest updates on the opioid cases. We know this affects so many people. I know every time I've opened up the phone lines about this here on the radio, people have called in, told us their stories, whether it's happened to them or whether it's happened to people that they know. This really is something that's become a national crisis, and hopefully we get the answers that we need coming out of all of this.
And I hope so too, Brandon. And I think that where I will really start to be happy about progress is when we start seeing Capitol Hill take some measures to actually put in place regulations on the front end, start really attacking that front end marketing, that front end pill pushing. That's where we're going to really start seeing some change that I will be somewhat satisfied about it as we start going down that path.
All right, Austin, thank you so much, man. We'll be doing this again.
Absolutely. Talk to you soon, Brandon.
Absolutely.